Okay, let's go ahead and get started now that we have Don back. Okay, so welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you joining us for the Choosing Atlanta panel today. I'm Ashley Tanks. I'm a Senior Director at the Metro Atlanta Chamber and Choose ATL. And my team is, part of the crew that's responsible and working behind the scenes to really tell Atlanta's story. We talk a lot about the remarkable talent we have here. And hopefully some of what you'll hear today, if you're not in Atlanta, might make you consider moving to Atlanta, because I think we've got a really cool innovation ecosystem here that we want to share with you. So again, thank you for joining us. I also want to just say a quick thank you to Techstars Startup Week Atlanta and its sponsors for creating this platform and allowing us to share some insights with you today. We're super lucky to have some incredible speakers with us today. So I hope that you will take advantage of this time. I know we've been a little quiet getting started here, but please feel free to drop questions and thoughts in the chat as we go. We will end with a Q&A. So again, drop your questions in so that we can go back and make sure that we're able to answer as many of them as possible, and we're able to really utilize this time with our great speakers. So to get us started, I want you to join me in welcoming our panelists. I'd love to just go around, have each of you share your name, your company, and the city that you're from before we get into talking about Atlanta. So maybe Laura, will you start us off?
Sure. My name is Laura Craig, and I'm a founder and partner of Outlander Labs, and we're an early stage fund that's based in Atlanta. We invest in companies that are all based throughout the Southeast, so Texas to Florida, Virginia, and everywhere in between. I'm originally from South Alabama, so grew up in the South and have family all over the South, but for the last decade, I was living in Los Angeles. And a year and a half ago, just wanted to be closer to family and made the move to Atlanta and the Southeast. So loving being back.
Awesome. Yusuf, will you go next?
Sure. My name is Yusuf Mohammed. I am Deputy General Counsel at Tesla. I left the Atlanta area. I've been started my legal career in Washington, D.C. and eventually moved my way to back to Atlanta to go in-house, essentially be an on-staff lawyer for a company up in Hall County. Anyway, I had an opportunity to join Tesla, was out there for about 5 years, and for a variety of family reasons as well, came back to work remotely. I've been remote with Tesla for about a little over a year now. There's actually two of us, there's actually 3 Tesla lawyers in the Atlanta area. 2 of us are actually Deputy General Counsel. I'm responsible for employment labor law, and my colleague is responsible for our energy sales business.
Awesome. Okay. Damola?
Hi, everybody. My name is Damola Benepe, co-founder and CEO of Civic Eagle. We help advocacy organizations, government relations departments, and lobbyists in general with their legislative analysis and policy management work. Moved here in 2018, went through the farm, so that's what brought me down to Atlanta, and basically haven't left. Love it down here. Two reasons I came down here, really. One was the farm, and the other one was to follow a girl that is now my fiance. So excited to be here.
Exciting. All right, Don. You're on mute. Graham, you want to take it away while he figures that out?
Don, figure that out. Hey everyone, I'm Graham Cohen. I am the co-founder of a media holding company called Breakout, an events platform that supports and empowers entrepreneurs, especially activists. I transitioned out of day-to-day a little while back, and so now I'm a partner at a boutique innovation consulting firm, a lot of buzzwords, but we try to solve problems and help connect corporations to entrepreneurs. I am an investor, I syndicate deals, and I'm coming from New York. Previously, I was in DC, that's where I grew up, but I've been in New York for the past 7 years, which was way too long, and I finally made the move to Atlanta 6 months ago. So I think I win. I think I'm the newest member to this lovely Atlanta community, and I don't miss anything about being away from New York. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, it looks like Don is going to jump out and jump back in. So let's see.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yay, we can hear you. Perfect timing.
Okay, so I'm embarrassed because I'm Don Charlton. I'm the founder and CEO of video messaging startup. So you think I would have my tech figured out, right? The company name is a Commute, which is, think of that as like making it really easy to instantly share short videos at work. And I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I started a recruiting software company back in 2009. And that was the first recruiting solution for companies like Uber, Dropbox, Instagram, and so forth. So I've been in Atlanta for 3 years, and I've enjoyed every minute of it at this point.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for those great introductions. Again, we want to hear from our attendees throughout, so please feel free. Like this should be a little informal. We want you to drop your comments and your questions in the chat box. So please don't be shy. Join in the conversation. So first up, I really kind of want to talk a little bit about Atlanta innovation. So it sounds like we've had you all here at different points. Some from here, others have spent time here and now have recently moved to Atlanta, but have hopefully all stayed really engaged with the Atlanta innovation community, and so much so that it's brought you back here. So I want to start just with kind of a little level set, a couple of stats for people that maybe are not as familiar with the innovation ecosystem here, and then we'll get into some questions. So Metro Atlanta is home to not only a robust intersection of startups and scaling companies, but also corporate innovation centers and tons of creative talent. And as we like to say, Atlanta is a thriving innovation hub. Atlanta was named #1 metro area top tech hub. Atlanta is also among the top 25 global startup ecosystems. The region has over 25 early stage capacity building programs. And we also think that innovation is just truly in our DNA. So I want to start off maybe by having each of you tell us just a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey and why you chose Atlanta. Let's start maybe, Don, let's start with you this time.
Got it. You can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, so I grew up in rural southwestern Pennsylvania, went off to school in New York, and then landed in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I went to school for graphic design, which became web design because I graduated in '99. I spent 10 years as a web designer, and then I was sitting there and I was listening to these TechCrunch 40 videos and so forth while I was programming websites, and I thought, those geeky white kids on the West Coast are pretty much using the same skills I have. So I thought maybe I would start a tech company in Pittsburgh. And what was interesting about that journey was Pittsburgh, we sort of, we got hit really hard in the .com bubble. And there was a long period of time where there wasn't really a lot of people in the Pittsburgh area willing to kind of take a swing at a high-tech startup. So I had entered really the first accelerator program that Pittsburgh had ever, back in 2009. And that's really where I just sort of started drinking from a fire hose, the world of tech startups and so forth. But I had a gap for a while, which was Pittsburgh didn't really have the ecosystem that Atlanta has. Like you started running into like scaling issues, like there isn't these layers of VPs all the way down to managers and individual contributors who are coming out of companies like MailChimp, Terminus, and so forth, who have some experience in SaaS technology. That's what we were. And, it made it really challenging to really kind of grow the business. And ironically, Laura's husband on here, Paige Craig, was my first angel investor. And one thing that he told me way back then was get the hell out of Pittsburgh, move to LA. I didn't listen to him. We still figured stuff out, but I didn't listen to him. It was really hard. We ended up actually opening up an office in Boston because I think my biggest challenge was, when you're not in a city where it's developing future leaders and in high-tech startups and so forth, every hire is like an algorithm, right? Like this person came from Heinz, which is consumer products, but maybe we can teach them software, right? And when I moved to Atlanta to kind of wrap up, because you kind of just get that. Like there's tons of talented people that are at some point going to be confident enough to join a new startup out of MailChimp, SalesLoft, and you name it and so forth. So I just really moved here because I love the amazing tech ecosystem for my next company, so I can de-risk not being able to build a team of leaders around me.
Awesome. I think that tees up Laura. Why don't you go next?
Mute.
You're on mute.
So as I mentioned, or as Dawn brought up, my husband's also in tech. He's been an investor for the last decade and invested in some epic companies along the way. And we spent the last 10 years living in Los Angeles and moved to the Southeast to be closer to family, and had kind of the opposite experience. I've been living in a major tech hub. Los Angeles has been home of huge the last 10 years, and had really evolved into, the same size like in New York City in terms of startups being created and funding. And so when we moved to the South, we did not assume we would do anything in tech here. We didn't know there was any tech here. 120 investments and not a single deal had we ever seen coming out of the Southeast. And so we got to Atlanta and just immediately started connecting with founders and other investors in the community. And we're just blown away by the level of activity, by the talent here. And we're just like, wow, there's a huge market, and especially of really, a lot of activity around early stage founders. Whereas Atlanta has a great ecosystem, it is still developing, and I think that one of the things we realized is that we could leverage our network of, over 1,000 venture capitalists nationwide and all of the incredible operators and founders that we've spent time with to really help create that network of mentorship and connection that founders in an emerging tech market really need to have access to. And so, we've been, just floored though by the talent, which is why we created Outlander Labs. We were like, wow, this is too much of an opportunity across the Southeast with so many talented founders who've been overlooked by the major tech markets to not have a fund here. So that was the inspiration for what we're doing today is the incredible founder talent that we started connecting with in the community once we got here.
I love that you mentioned that, Atlanta is still developing and that, we have all this great talent here. Something that we hear oftentimes is that talent feel like this is a place where they can make their mark. And I think that you said that perfectly. So thank you for flagging that part. Graham, why don't you go next?
Make their mark, because I feel like that's so important to at least what I feel for Atlanta. So I could talk forever about the journey because there's so many steps that led me here, but ultimately our company was hosting events all over the country, from chartering an airplane to South Beach to doing events in blizzards in Detroit. We went every city around the country. And coming from New York, I feel like cities like Atlanta, New Orleans, and Detroit, to name a few, it was so compelling to see entrepreneurs actually working to solve real problems in the city and feeling that like community that they were actually making a difference. And being, I think coming from New York, it's unbelievable for your social capital network, but you're still a small fish in a big pond. And I found it so appealing to actually come somewhere eventually and put down roots and be a part of like making the city what you wanted it to be. So I'll add one more thing so Kate Atwood, who used to work at Chamber of Commerce, I don't know if that was before you, Ashley, or with you, but she convinced us to throw an event in Atlanta. And we looked at her and were like, why would we ever come to Atlanta? We don't get what's happening in the city. Like, why would entrepreneurs care or want to be about it? And I think I was here for 2.5 days before I told my wife we need to move to Atlanta. I was in love. And I think what people don't understand is it's the people. The people in this city are so special. And I want to be very clear that I think what makes the city so special is that it's not just tech. It's artists, it's tattoo artists, it's nonprofits, it's up and coming chefs. And Atlanta was like the coolest city in the sense that they have that joke, like everyone has a side hustle, but that's what makes the city so special. Is everyone has a side hustle and it's good. And so I knew when it was time to get out of New York, think about starting a family, have a backyard, that Atlanta had everything I wanted in a city. And I'm so thankful that I could finally make that happen.
That is awesome. Like we often talk about the mix of careers. Obviously, we've got the corporates, we have the startups, but also it's the community. To your point, it's the people that are here. And then, I mean, who can deny that Atlanta has this unique culture that is hard to even put in words, that everybody, you know, really loves. So I really love the way that you described that as well. Yusuf, let's go to you.
Yeah, so I grew up in this area. I grew up in Hall County, which is up near Gainesville on the lake. And you know, went to Georgia Tech undergrad. You know, saw a little bit of the engineering world. Had my eyes set on going to law school. Went to Georgia Law School, and started my career in government. And so graduated from law school in '97. That's sort of when my legal career starts. I go to government, and after a few years, it's always been my plan to go into the private sector, and primarily even to own a business one day. But as a government employee, I didn't really have an idea of how do you run a business. So I said, well, maybe I'll go practice law and, you know, watch people run a business. So I joined a company here up in Hall County, so back, you know, where home was for about the next 9 years. Then I had this opportunity to join Tesla in 2014. And, you know, when you're given a seat on the rocket ship, right, you don't say no. So took my wife and 2 children, and away we went to California, and we were out there for 5 years. And like I said, moved back about 17 months ago. And so, you know, each one of these journeys, kind of like each opportunity kind of gave me an opportunity to apply some skills to the next gig. And a big thing that I learned at working at the poultry company up here in Hall County was there was a lot of focus at that particular company, a little bit atypical to the industry, on collaboration, as well as even conflict resolution issues within an organization. And so when I had the opportunity to go to Tesla, I was like, this is a relatively small company. We were struggling in 2014 to make 27,000 cars a year. So now we're making 500,000 cars. So you can imagine the scale and the growth that's happening there. But everybody was operating kind of like in their little silo. So this was an opportunity for me to kind of be a change agent and bring all these different disciplines together for my area, what I get to affect, and bring those people to the table so that they can actually talk to each other, not past each other. I often find teams who've done things completely in opposite to one another because they're not talking. We found that actually the lawyers at the company tended to be the glue on a lot of issues because they're talking to different client groups throughout the company. And we tend to be a small and pretty tight group. When I came back to Atlanta, so when I left in 2014, you know, ATDC was already on the ground. Some of the big exits obviously had not happened yet. And I think when I, you know, again, having been from this area, I see a lot of these changes I can kind of trace back to the Olympic Games, and that really kind of blowing Atlanta over into becoming a real major international city. When I left, I did not feel like there was when I left in 97, 98, I didn't feel like there was a great place for me as a diverse lawyer in Atlanta. I didn't feel like this could be home forever. When I came back, I felt that was changing. And certainly I feel like it's even changed even further just in the last few years. The number of funds has blown up compared to what I remember seeing back when I lived here the first time. I wasn't plugged into the entrepreneurship ecosystem. Now it's one of those things that I'm like, every place I turn, there's more opportunity and more groups and more folks to interact with and to learn from. So, you know, I've done what some of these folks have already done, which is I've actually started to get involved in investing in some of these early stage companies because I'm like, these guys are doing some stuff that is, you know, crazy good. You know, thank God they're not out in San Francisco because they're, you know, the VC community may be all over them out there. So in any case, it just, like I said, I've been very, very pleased with what I saw. And like I said, I moved back here primarily for family reasons. And from the company's perspective, it was a talent retention question for them. Like, do we keep this guy or he's got to move back because his kids are growing up and he's making some certain life choices, or do we let him be remote? And it's worked out for the company and it's worked out for me so far, so good.
Mm-hmm. I love how you talk about the integration piece. I think, again, that's one of the benefits of being here in Atlanta. The tech community is not just tech. Like, we really do talk about innovation and how there are all these cross sections and ways for us to integrate across. So I love that you mentioned that. Damola, let's go to you, and then we'll jump into some of our questions about the ecosystem.
Yeah, so I mean, for about a year, I was trying to figure out a way to get down to Atlanta, to be honest. I was traveling back and forth, you know, probably all of 2017. Again, young lady that lived here that I was dating at the time, engaged now. So I was traveling back and forth, and I was basically already trying to figure out how can I get myself to Atlanta. And you know, in 2017, me and my co-founders had made the decision or started transitioning to making the decision that we were going to build our company remote first, that we were going to build Civic Eagle remote first. So that opened up an opportunity where, you know, we could be anywhere we wanted to be if that was in fact going to be how we built, you know, built the company. And 2018, when we, you know, when we got into the farm in 2018, we were the inaugural class of the farm that's backed by Comcast and Boomtown. That was the second check into the company. So we hadn't raised any money in 2017. In 2018, and really started building the product at the beginning of 2018. The first two checks in the company, the first one was Arlen Hamilton at Backstage Capital, and the second one was going through the farm and getting that little bit of money. And that made a pretty big difference. Like it validated what we were working on. It gave us mentorship, it gave us advice. Borunda Prince, who was the managing director there, was really helpful in introducing me and my co-founders to people in the Atlanta area and the Atlanta ecosystem, and it really accelerated our growth, and that was helpful. So for us, like our startup journey really started, you know, having legs in 2018, and I think a big part of that was the farm. You know, since then we've raised, like where we are now, we've raised $3 million. We're doing a little over $500,000 in annual recurring revenue. Our first big corporate logo was Comcast going through the farm. So it was a nice program and kind of like launching pad for us to figure out what we were doing with the company and how to make things go and work. So now we're also a team of 14 now. We're spread across the country, so we're remote first. I'm the only person in the company that's in Atlanta. I love Atlanta, like love Atlanta. Loved it since when I came down here for the Atlanta Greek picnic in 2009, right? When AirTran was doing the $49 flights for college students. For folks that remember that. So I look at myself as a multi-state resident. So I typically go back and forth between Minnesota and Atlanta, since we're headquartered in Minnesota, and we have a lot of I know, right? And we have a lot of customers in Minnesota and a great network, but Atlanta has really become my home, and it's been great to grow and accelerate the company here.
So, Demola, I want to stay with you for a second. Tell me, what do you think it is about Atlanta that makes Atlanta a unique innovation hub? Like, you know, you've been to other places, you were trying to get here for a girl that now you're engaged to, but specific to the innovation hub, what makes Atlanta unique? What stood out to you?
It's one of the few cities that has it's the state capital. It's also the largest major metro city, major metro area, and then it also has a pretty robust kind of economic engine that revolves around the corporations that are here, which is good for B2B SaaS companies, but then also a growing ecosystem, startup ecosystem. So I think all of those factors, where you have government support, you're in a major metro area, you have access to public transportation, you have access to talent. There's a lot of great folks out here. We don't have any employees that are from Atlanta, but we did hire somebody that either did his graduate degree or his undergraduate degree at Georgia Tech. So, you know, it's one of those rare cities in the country where you have all of those things. I honestly can't think of any other ones at the top of my head that has all of that going for it. So it makes it easier to be able to, you know, accelerate your company, get mentors, get advice, you know, figure things out. But like I said, when you have an economic engine in a major metro area, diversity, access to talent, government that is right there, you know, that's kind of at the center of the state universe, it makes things a little bit better. Awesome.
Don, would you add anything to that? What makes Atlanta a unique innovation hub?
I would summarize it as, you know, one of the challenges being on the West Coast is there's tons of support for tech startups, like opportunities for funding and connections and so forth, but there's also a ton of competition, resources and so forth. What I like about Atlanta is also what I benefited from when I was in Pittsburgh, right? Which is, if you can make a little bit of noise in Atlanta, you have an entire city supporting you, right? Like there's sort of an up and coming city in terms of, I mean, it's kind of funny. Meanwhile, we have MailChimp, which is like quietly killing it, right? Right in Atlanta. But if you're an up and coming startup, you know, your ability to connect with the power brokers or the people who can connect you to the right talent and so forth in Atlanta, there's not as many barriers to it, because whenever you you make a little bit of noise in Atlanta, I think that everybody kind of roots for you and wants you to become successful. Like the way I joke about it is Atlanta wants logos to be on the tops of buildings, and like from the mayor's office all the way to hard to do when she came here, you know, that access to that spectrum, and including the corporations that Damola mentioned, you know, you're not going to get that in a whole lot of geographical areas. I think I saw a question in there about what's the difference between New York and LA. It's less noise, right? If you're able to make some noise, there's less noise to get access to the people and the resources to grow.
Okay. Laura, I want to get you in here. Can you describe the venture capital market here in the region, and what do you see as like some areas of strength here?
That's a good question. The market is growing, I think, which is exciting. Yeah, more angels starting to come onto the scene. I think one of the things that's really interesting that you don't see in other markets is that there is a lot of wealth in the South that came from different types of traditional businesses. And as that wealth is being passed on to the next generation, you have people in their, call it mid 30s to mid 40s, who are taking over family offices and who are super, super interested in technology as a category for investment. So I think that is going to accelerate the number of investors, both in new funds and in angel, opportunities and angel syndicate groups, but also just people who can directly write checks into companies. I think it's a growing ecosystem of investors and people who are very eager to participate. I think Atlanta is definitely strong venture-wise in certain areas where you're obviously focused on B2B enterprise companies because we have such a density, an incredible density of Fortune 100 companies based in Atlanta. I'd say though that it's still very early. It's a very small pool of investors overall. I think, there's a lot of categories of investment focus that are still missing, which makes it really hard for entrepreneurs who are starting businesses here. So I think that there's a lot of exciting momentum, people who've laid the foundation for great funds and who have great funds and more investors coming into the ecosystem. So there's good momentum, which I think is the leading indicator of where we're going next.
So that's great. So we talked a lot about like some of the strengths, but I'm curious, and anyone can jump in here. I'm curious, like, what are some of the areas that we need to further develop? Like, what are some of the things that we need to continue or start doing in order to help Atlanta, really grow and become a true global innovation hub?
I mean, I'll start and let everyone else jump in. I think, some of the things that we see is that a lot of people investing in technology companies here, where it's great that the capital is there, they're not seasoned technology investors. Most of the money has come from other things. And so when you put those types of folks around the table, especially at the early stages of companies, they may not always have the best connections or network or advice even for some of these companies to help them understand, like, what do those later stage investors in the major tech markets look for, as you're growing that startup. So I think that's a big challenge, as well as, like I said, there's some category gaps and some stage gaps that just, until you get to a bigger ecosystem of overall investors, is definitely a challenge depending on what category of business you're in.
I want to double down on what Laura said, and I'm sure you're down here in Atlanta because you're seizing the opportunity and see the opportunity to invest in great early stage companies. And I think there is a lack of sophistication from some investors. I think once you've got some traction as a company and you raise some capital, you start understanding that money is more of a commodity and you need a lot more support and networks from investors and seasoned investors. And excuse me. And I think Atlanta, just in general, the investment community can definitely evolve in their level of sophistication as investors, and also how they're able to bring more to the table than just money, like some investors across the country can bring to the table. So being able to invest in and lead rounds from great companies requires more than just capital. And I think that's something that could evolve in Atlanta. I also think that Corporate innovation in Atlanta is a bit performative. I'd love to see a little bit more transactional nature of corporations doing, more. I'd like to see some more M&A deals with some of the corporations here, both from a corporate innovation side of things, corporate development and corporate innovation and that nature. So those are the two areas that I think could be better investing on one hand in terms of actual like VCs and angels, and increasing their sophistication, and then less performative on the corporate side of things.
And I'll add. So my previous company raised a total of $24 million. When I moved down here, what I was a little bit surprised at is I think Laura and Damola hit some of these nails on the head. There's the idea of what progress is for an early stage startup, deal terms that make sense for both sides, so you don't end up having a really bad relationship in the future. Those seem a little bit behind here in Atlanta, and I think also I would say that I think because a lot of the capital is slowly gravitating towards being kind of family money to perhaps an opportunity for growth investment, there's sort of like a capital preservation mindset on top of capital preservation is not necessarily the goal. If you're trying to do venture deals, it's actually about trying to leverage capital to not worry about preserving capital because you've crushed it with 1 out of 10 companies. And I think some of those things are a little for example, I came down here and I was pretty well plugged in. I didn't raise money from anybody down here, but I was able to go to New York and raise $400,000 pre-seed in a couple of days. So I think it's just a matter of I think it's that gap. And the gap is I think Outlander's trying to fill that gap, which is there's a certain point where you need people who believe in you and your idea, where there's a shit ton of risk, right? Hope nobody's mad at us. Where that's where really good companies start to surface. And then at that point, there's another gap in Atlanta where you have traction that is expected of an early stage startup, but the deal terms are not the type of deal terms you should be getting, given how rare it is to get to $35,000 in MRR. And I think candidly, I think the only way that will change is if people who want to get in deals lose deals because they offer non-competitive terms. And that's why I think more investors coming in here and kind of changing the dynamics of deal flow here. I think there's going to be less, in some cases, I think predatory investing here a little bit based on lack of entrepreneurs' experience. And more sort of mutually beneficial investment from some of the institutions here. I'm just going to be a little more blunt than everybody here because it's definitely palpable. And I would say for Atlanta to recognize how it can be great is to understand that is a topic of discussion amongst all entrepreneurs here in Atlanta, right? So we have to kind of overcome that murmuring around the investment community in this region.
No, we definitely appreciate you being candid. Let's go to Graham, and then I want to ask one of the questions that was dropped in the chat.
Cool. Sorry. So yeah, I totally believe sometimes it's a life cycle and it takes a little time, and you'll see as companies have bigger success and become more credible and get national press. I could talk a lot about my experience in ventures, kind of like a piggyback type thing. And so more people will be jumping in. But what I guess I'm interested in sharing and maybe getting other panelists' thoughts or our listeners is that I think one of the biggest strengths of a New York, LA, San Francisco is the angel network, but not necessarily angel network, just access to easy capital. Because I think many times it takes a failure, one bad startup for founders to get their feet ready or to get to that second startup. And I think it's much easier to get that first 1 or 2 startups going so that you're prepared for the third startup. And I feel like what Atlanta's missing is always, it's like New York, they're already in the infrastructure. I had a bad startup. I met all the VC community. It didn't work, but they've gotten to know me, and now I'm ready for the second one. And it just seems like in Atlanta, we're missing that stage. It's always, you have to be so prepared and ready to go to the VC community and get money. But it's like, we're missing kind of that quick speed pilots, ideas get going. And so I always felt like when I was visiting Atlanta, that's what you're missing. You're missing being able to walk over to Wall Street and ask your friend's friend for starters money to get some of these early ideas going.
Did anyone want to?
Yeah.
When I was going to jump in on that too, because I think that you're exactly right. Where you know the questions. It's been such a shock coming to the Southeast, where we meet with startups in the early phases, and they're like, I mean, they're so much more advanced. They've gotten so much further than companies that you meet with in a major tech market, and it just speaks to the talent here, right? But it's in some ways because of this investor community that has said, oh, the bar is way up here. It's actually around 3x higher to raise the same dollars, right, metrics wise. And I think that, but unfortunately, that sometimes comes at a cost to the startups, because there are certain metrics that you shouldn't be focused on, and you should be focused more on growth and speed and learning and iterating versus just revenue, right? And so I think that that's something that we see as a challenge, because when these companies do get bigger and they want to raise that 10, 20, $100 million, they're being judged by people who think about metrics in a very different way than the local community. And it's funny, because we even asked ourselves this question, which was, you know, why are there not, if there's this much talent here, why are there not more $1 billion plus outcomes? And you get here and you meet so many founders who are consistently being told, like, the biggest exit that could ever possibly happen is $100 million exit, and you should do it in as short of a time as possible and with as little dollars raised as possible, because that's the mindset of the local community. And it's like, oh, well, if you tell a founder that the biggest outcome that they could ever possibly have is $100 million and they should exit quickly so they can return people's money quickly, then no one's ever going to go for the $1 billion outcome. Whereas when you're in Silicon Valley and in New York and LA, these major tech markets, I mean, investors talk about looking for decacorns. Like, what company is going to be the next $10 billion plus company? So that's a huge, huge disconnect.
Can I add? Yeah, can I add? So in February 19, you know, my family was in California, and we were starting to plan our return. And, you know, just to kind of give you a sense of it, there was not a day in California that we were not planning our return to Atlanta. So another plug for Atlanta here. But one of the things that in February of 19, I came down here and I'm visiting with a bunch of folks and trying to learn the ecosystem and all that. And I'm told, you know, well, Atlanta's a mid-market company. They're really not that interested in pre-revenue companies. And you know, a lot of the VCs and private equity, they're just not interested in jumping the shark there yet. And that really sort of surprised me, because and then the next comment was, well, if they're any good, they're going to pack up and go to San Francisco or New York or Chicago, for example. And these mindsets, I was like, this is insane. I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like in that year and a half since I started to have those conversations, that there's actually been a little bit of a shift, more of a willingness to take bets on pre-revenue organizations. Again, I think, you know, to Laura's point, you know, it's almost like less risk because I've got a company with good recurring revenue now. Well, there's less reward at the end of the day, right? As opposed to make the big bets on great ideas and then nurture them until they are a unicorn, et cetera. But I think that mindset's changing. I think San Francisco is getting smart to that. In other words, I think some of the VC shops will start to open up more and more offices here, because they're going to be smart that, you know, the local investors here are not really as willing to risk their money. And quite frankly, why let those guys have the money, you know, from San Francisco? So, but I do think that they, you know, I know of at least one shop that's opened up a local office here. I'm sure others will do the same over the next few years. But I think it is an opportunity missed to really consider great ideas from pre-revenue organizations.
One of the things that I'm hearing a lot through your comments is about the notion of the need to continue to build the ecosystem here. And so there are a couple different pieces to that. And I want to kind of get your insight on, you know, how we can do this. But like when we talk about like the importance of collaboration, ecosystem building, diversity and inclusion in tech, let's talk a little bit about that. How can we pull in those pieces to continue to build this ecosystem and make it a place where, you know, and make it a place that investors feel like, you know, they can invest and get big wins, as well as for the startups, you know, that are struggling to have to, you know, come out the gate and have be so much more prepared than some of their counterparts in other cities. What can we do in those areas?
I think, are you asking that to Yusuf? Or is that...
No, I'm throwing that out to the group, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I think some of that's already happening, right? I mean, to me, it's who's in charge of the money, right? Like that's how you increase the diversity of entrepreneurs or founders. That's how those founders end up, growing companies that are diverse and having exits, and then those employees start their own companies, and you can kind of have that virtuous cycle. But it all kind of starts from who are the LPs in the funds, and who are the managing partners in funds that are deploying that capital and generating that wealth. And I think we're already seeing that, right, with some of the funds that are getting started here in the Twin Cities, some of the stuff that Jewel is doing and Joey's doing, and the ability to be able to deploy capital to founders that look like me, right, and to more diverse founders and Black and brown people and women in general. So I think that some of that I'm already seeing and paying attention to, and the thing is that entrepreneurs are paying attention to that, right? Like we more and more founders care about where is the money coming from, right? Who is putting money into my company? Who am I partnering with? And we don't have a single investor on our cap table, a single fund on our cap table where all the managing partners are white dudes. Like there's not one. And I care about that. I really do pay attention to that. So us as entrepreneurs and as founders, asking those questions, caring, paying attention, and subsequently funds and the people that actually are deploying this capital, understanding that in order for them to deploy capital effectively and into companies that are worth the damn, you're going to have to make sure that you also have diverse representation of people that are actually putting this money to work. So I'm seeing that in Atlanta. I don't really see it in a lot of other places. We have investors from like 4 major cities or 4 different cities. But I think Atlanta is the only place that I've seen do it right and do it in a way where there's more than just one fund. And also the fund isn't like a diversity fund, right? It's a fund. There's funds that are ran by Black and brown folks that are investing in good companies, right? And that's the general.
Yeah.
Graham, it looked like maybe.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, so
I was just agreeing. Go ahead, Don.
I would agree with a lot of that too. I think there's a lot of really good stuff. So first, the Atlanta Founders Academy was really fantastic. I won't take any of Laura's thunder, but they have a really interesting model where they have a diverse investment team, basically saying we'll invest in everybody, but we believe with a diverse investment team, a lot more people of color and women are going to have more opportunities. So there's a lot of interesting things like that. But if you zoom out at the macro level, I'm in many ways, I'm kind of like an OG Black guy in Texas. I was trying to raise capital in 2009, and I've watched the same story over the years, 1% this, 1% that, with a lot of skepticism. I think it's telling that 2 of the most two of the most well-known tech companies in Atlanta were founded by African men that could barely raise a dime in the city of Atlanta. So Calendly, which eventually raised some capital, and LeaseQuery. Now, those entrepreneurs benefited from that because they own an outsized amount of their company. But their mindset also is maybe you got to do it yourself. You got to bootstrap. And my frustration is Elon Musk can go unprofitable for years because I think that the narrative that we have to show is that it's not about who is creating value. It's about how much money have people been able to burn in order to find the next big thing. And that's why we're shifting in this certain number of people who like we don't have an African-American who has ever made like a $250 million miss on a tech startup, right? Meanwhile, we anybody on here who's in tech knows Magic Leap was a huge flop with $1 billion in. And I was on a list of people of 200 African-American founders where where all of us had raised $1 million and the total amount was $2 billion. So I think that, Atlanta, I think is a good starting point. But the problem is that we are starting at such an early beginning in terms of African-Americans gaining enough capital because people don't understand the cascading of it. If you don't have if you can't raise a $10 million round and instead you raise a $3 million round, now everybody that you might try to recruit is now thinking you don't have enough capital maybe to help them, for them to quit their job and come join you. There's a cascading effect whenever you don't have capital that just through being fortunate to have fought through some of those barriers over the years, I recognize that it's a compounding effect if you're not able to because capital will, I think Alex Wilhelm is in here. Capital will get Alex to write about your article, about your company, and so forth, right? So I think, yeah, I'll shut up now. But I think, I think Atlanta has a lot of really good stuff. But the problem is that we are starting at a very, very early stage in terms of equity with investment.
So when we think no, that's perfect, Laura. I was actually going to bring you in here, just, talking about diverse founders more broadly, both African-American women founders. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, so I joke, Don's an OG Black founder raising money. I raised $30 million for my venture-backed startup, and, just watched with despair year after year of the stats remain exactly the same in terms of percentages of venture capital dollars that go to Black women, like just appalling. And, walking into pitch after pitch with rooms full of all white guys who all went to the same Ivy League schools, who all worked at Google. And, then there was a wave of let's hire female partners, but then they weren't really partners. They didn't have voting abilities or check writing abilities around the table. Like they were token partners or they were associates. And to me, that's, it's not just a challenge in the Southeast or Atlanta, it's a challenge nationally speaking. And so that's why when Paige and I decided to launch Outlander, we were like, the only way to change this problem is to change who's writing the checks. So we're 50% women, we're 50% Black. Like we said, hey, and actually we didn't hire, my husband is the only white guy on our team. So we're 100% diverse other than Paige. And we said, you know what, we're not going to be a diversity fund. We're just going to be a great early stage fund. But we're going to hire this amazing diverse investment team. And that's going to fundamentally change our pipeline, which it has. I mean, in our first 60 days of the fund, I think 85% of the deals we've looked at are minority-led companies, and actually everything so far that we've invested in as part of the core fund has been a minority-led business. So female founders, Black founders, that the talent, and I actually think Atlanta is such an interesting market to make this shift because for a long time now, Atlanta has been considered a place, at least, of Black excellence. People jokingly call it Wakanda, and it's a place where you go and you see Black wealth. And so I think that there is a real opportunity, to make a bigger impact, even in some ways in a market like Atlanta than in a place where, like, yes, founders care where, like San Francisco, Silicon Valley, like, founders care where their capital is coming from. But if you're growing a really big business and you need to raise $100 million, trust me, at every stage you go up the stream of the capital stack in terms of dollars you need to raise, it gets less and less diverse. So, I mean, it's about finding as good of people as you can early on and great people in the other funds along the way. But, it is a big problem across the board. And we think is a good move to start to change those dynamics. And I think there are a lot of other folks who are starting to think about it as well. Because, when you change who writes the checks. Yeah, I mean,
I love that you shared how you all were so intentional about building your team. And I'm curious, for the rest of our panelists, to share maybe something that you are currently doing within your organization, or that you would charge others in your position to do, to continue to make sure that we're building an inclusive startup ecosystem here in Atlanta. What is something that you're doing, or that you would charge other people in your position to also step in and do?
Can I jump in?
I'll say I was terrible. Oh, yeah.
No, go ahead, Don. Okay. Thank you.
Yusef, you go ahead.
I'll give it a shot. So one of the things, I probably have been less intentional about diversity inclusion and in my hiring than I should have, but I've ended up finding it I sort of accidentally got into it, if you will. Let me explain. So one of the things that really attracts me are candidates who have done something really unique off the wall in their own background, right? I did not have a whole bunch of doors open to me after I graduated from law school. I didn't have offers being thrown at me. So I kind of had to fight my way and find my way through to, to where I am. And I look for candidates that have something unusual in their background that kind of tested their mettle, brought them where they are. I found that, and maybe this is just purely anecdotal, there's no data that I have to back this up, is that those that have had to kind of claw their way have tended to be minorities and women. So the result on my team is I've got a team of 60% women and 60% minorities. And I think part of that is because some of those folks have had to claw their way into getting to where they are. And they are doing some incredible work on my team. And so I'm looking for that, people who have not had it handed to them. And that's how I've ended up, building the team of my job that I've been able to build. I'm refining that as my career goes on in terms of like adding that level of intentionality. So as I was looking to expand my team in Europe, I had to, where diversity and inclusion does not mean the same thing that it means here in the US. But I'm looking at some of the socioeconomic problems that they are having there. And I'm like, are you, Mr. Miss Recruiter, are you looking for diverse candidates to join my team? So now I'm like insisting on it that what the team over there, even though it's not necessarily part of their spoken value system the way it might be here, I'm now insisting on it that the candidates that they bring to the table for me, those include diverse candidates, because I want to make sure that I've got the strongest team that I can possibly have.
Don, did you have something to add there?
Real quick, so I was really terrible at this in Pittsburgh. Like, it was very difficult for me. Actually, I wouldn't say it was difficult. I would say that 10 years ago, if you were an African American and you got a job as like a director of marketing or something at Heinz, right? You had actually broken through a lot of ceilings, and trying to pull that person to come out and work at your early stage company in Pittsburgh was really, really difficult. But what I like about it in Atlanta is, and Laura kind of touched upon this a little bit, is that there's a middle class here. There's people here who've made enough money that they can take more risks. There's tons of women and minorities who've worked in tech companies and so forth. So the idea of, leaving like the idea of a stable job in a big company is not so deeply ingrained in the culture here. Like, I look at like the team at Calendly and so forth. There's product managers. We did an integration with them, and their partnership person was an African American woman. And the product manager I was working with was an African-American guy, and the marketing person was a woman, right? So, I think that what I'm excited about is the fact that I think that I'll be able to do a better job this time in being able to find people that, are already predispositioned to want to be in tech startups. Because, and again, I got 10 years of thinking around this stuff or whatever. So starting this new company in the last year, it makes me realize that the world has changed a lot, and Atlanta is a great place if you want to be able to build a diverse team, because everybody's hungry for equity. You don't have to explain to them what equity is down here. People know the value of it, and they want it, and they're willing to take the risks and so forth to be able to get it.
Cool. Graham, Damola, either of you, what is something that you're doing or that you would charge others like you to do to continue to build an inclusive ecosystem here in Atlanta?
Yeah, I guess I would say a couple of things. One, when we started Breakout, it was 2 white male founders, and I ultimately transitioned out because we wanted to hire people to better represent the community we're highlighting. And it's very difficult when you're a bootstrap startup because we're not making enough money to pay people the salaries they need, which is the difficult part. And so talking about Don and risk, and there's different levels to be an entrepreneur, but it's very risky to get in either on your own idea or in companies and get that equity on the ground up. And I think, and maybe this falls in the life cycle, but there's certain people who have nets behind them that can take more risks and chances than others. For instance, if my company failed, worst comes to worst, I'm sleeping in my parents' basement, right? Until I get back on my feet. But I am blown away by individuals who take risks and chances, knowing that if they don't succeed, they're not sure how they're gonna get food on the table or pay for the rent. And so I think one of the things we're kind of charged with doing was creating a supportive community that helps those individuals. So be that support system, whether it's through mentorship, networking, or capital, or shared best practices. And also, we launched a foundation when I was 30 years old So I think that's something more of us can do, is launch foundation to help people with capital, because if you look around at how people are getting funding to just, again, start small businesses, it's just difficult. And sometimes it comes from stodgy, bigger foundations. And I would think more about like our younger generation. If you can and have any success, start thinking about how you can get more capital in the hands of young entrepreneurs who, again, don't have the net, and see how you can be supportive.
And I can add just a quick 2 cents. To provide, our team was founded by 3 Black people, so me and then 2 Black women. So it makes it, to be honest, like it makes it pretty easy for us to attract diverse talent onto the team, because guess what? They go to our team page, they see a bunch of people that look like them, and they say, you know what, I'll probably be comfortable there. So I think one thing that other companies can do is, you know, make sure that you highlight the leadership in your company when they're diverse, because it attracts more diverse talent to come and want to work for you. So that's made things a lot easier for us. A little too easy. We've had to like go back and like actually be more intentional about things. So we added diversity metrics as one of our KPIs. So we're actually measuring ourselves every quarter, every year, on an ongoing basis on our dashboard in terms of some of the things that are important to us when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's something everybody can do. And then the second thing that we do that we recently added that I think everybody can do is creating a values council. So if you have core values, and we have 3 values: people first, transparency, audacity. And we basically say any major transaction, major hire, anything that we do needs to be indexed against those values, right? And if there's any sort of large transactional thing that's happening, the values council has to participate with, and it's not just the executive team, but there's also representation from employees at large to be able to come in and be part of that decision making. Because it's important for us to continue to live up to our values. And it's really easy for me to kind of sometimes lose perspective. So being able to have that infused as part of kind of our operations has helped a lot. So I encourage everybody, if diversity is important to you, DEI is important to you, create a council that like monitors that watches it, that holds leadership accountable. And we're doing it a little bit differently. It's not necessarily around DEI, but it's one of our core values is being people first. And that includes some of our DEI KPIs. So it helps us to be able to live those values.
That's great. I love that. Okay, so last question, and for sure, if there's anyone else that has joined us that has a question, drop it in the chat. We might be able to, stay a few minutes longer, but I do have one last question for the panel before we wrap, if we don't get any there. I'm just curious from each of you really quickly, kind of your biggest risk that you've taken on your career, and couple that with one piece of advice that you would give entrepreneurs and young folks that have joined us today. We can go around. Yusef, you start.
Yeah, sorry. The biggest risk I would say was definitely joining Tesla in 2014. To me, I'm a close follower of the car industry just because I like cars and I've always have. But I always thought of them as a science project. So having the opportunity offered to me to join them was, I was like, okay, let me drive one of these cars, see what it's like. And then I was kind of impressed. And I said, okay, well, now, what am I going to look at in 5 years from now as to whether or not, if I turn this job down, how's that going to feel in 5 years if I say no? Because I had another opportunity that I was looking at that would have kept me here in Atlanta, and it would have been less disruptive for my family to move across the country, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that was probably the biggest, the biggest risk. And obviously it had, it has had a very positive and great impact on my career and on my family. And it was great to live out there and just live in a new city and, have an adventure for a few years. My advice to folks would be, be fearless. The biggest thing that I learned at Tesla was, and Don mentioned Elon's name earlier, is what makes him successful and what makes the company successful is the willingness to eat glass for a particular idea. They are going to they're going to walk through brick walls to get this executed. And you're going to have people tell you, you can't do such and such, or that's not done, or that's not the right way to do it, or the traditional way. Who cares what they think? Do it the way that you think is the right way to do it, the way that makes sense, as long as you've thought it through. And, until you are convinced that such and such can't be done, don't accept that from somebody, whether it's your lawyer or your accountant or, any, service provider like me. Make sure that you are, really pressure testing what you're being told, and make sure that it's actually accurate and fits what your needs are. Because chances are there's somebody creative out there who can find the solution that you're looking for and isn't just sitting there telling you, no, you can't do this and can't do that.
I love that. Be fearless. Okay, Graham.
I've taken a million risks, and a lot of them have worked out really poorly, some well. But I think the biggest thing that I'd like to share with people is just continue to push yourself to learn. If you're ever in a situation where you're feeling stagnant and you're not learning something new, it's time to change in some way. And that doesn't always necessarily mean you got to quit your job and jump off a cliff. Just keep pushing yourself personally for personal development and growth. And most of my success has been, I guess, having that gut feeling that something was right. And so, like, for instance, if there's a company you want to work for, just get in the door. If you have to be a free intern, whatever it takes, just get in the door and prove it and do it. And so if Demol or Don, if their companies are where you want to go, get in the door with them at all costs.
I like that. Demola, why don't you go next? Biggest risk and piece of advice.
Biggest risk that I've undertaken. I don't know. I'm pretty risk tolerant. So I don't know if me talking about. I mean, I've done a lot of physical risky things, business risky things. I don't know. Probably just, putting all of my capital into Civic Eagle to start it. I don't know. It's probably the riskiest thing, business wise. There's a bunch of other stuff, but I think entrepreneurs generally, we all have different risk tolerances, and we tend to be more on the most tolerant side of things, both for our physical health as well as for maybe business. But for the second question, advice, I think the biggest thing for me has been like, be really intentional about everything that you do. Like, once we started being less reactionary, at least for me, less reactionary and just more intentional about everything, meaning intentional around who we're working with, the networks that we're building, accepting, invitations to speak on panels and thinking thoroughly about and being intentional about it. Once, I started being more intentional and our team started being more intentional, and I would say like beginning of 2018, that's when things turned around for us and we really started to figure things out. My biggest piece of advice, like, be the strategic, intentional person that you are. I promise you, most people that get to the level that you want to get to are not reactionary. They make what they want to have happen. And they think very thoughtfully and intentionally about what they want to do and how they want to do it.
I love that. So far we've got be fearless, be intentional, and just take a step forward, just every day, kind of that constant movement forward. Laura, why don't you go next?
Yeah, so I always joke that I'm your standard blonde Jew from South Alabama who moved to French Canada and then started a career in interior design, and then with no background of business or finance or technology or anything relevant to starting a startup, I decided to start a venture-backed startup. So, my path has been atypical. The riskiest thing I ever did, I guess, was I also put all my money into my first startup with no idea what I was doing or what I was really getting myself into. But I think the advice that actually a good friend gave me at the time was, if not you, it's going to be someone else, and you're smart. So why not you? And if not now, when? So I think that, be fearless and believe in yourself. And most importantly, don't be afraid to fail, because those lessons learned are the things that are going to propel adventure and make you truly great in the future. So, don't be afraid to go after what you really believe in, and don't be afraid to fall on your face doing it.
All right. Last up, Don, close us out.
Yeah, I think what's funny, obviously the biggest risk I took was probably quitting my job, but I got very lucky with my first company. I had product market fit after one month. So I didn't really feel a trough of risk. But my advice to founders, I would say, especially because the audience in here would be most likely tech entrepreneurs. And like, it was something that I learned, and I realized that it was one of your greatest assets, because there's going to be times you don't realize that if you have a desire to actually build a large tech company, right, to get 10 million plus in revenue, 100 million in revenue, and so forth, there are going to be moments in your entrepreneurial journey where, like, literally what you say in the next 5 minutes is the reason why you got funding. What you say in the next 5 minutes is the reason why you got that particular client. And what I mean is, know your shit. So in other words, you know, I think one of the biggest challenges, especially in the Atlanta area, is I think that a lot of the entrepreneurs here don't necessarily know exactly where the bar truly is. Like, you need to know your industry and what growth for different stages of capital look like for your industry. Because what you don't want is to have a ton of frustration when the reality is, if you had a good friend, they would look at you and say, look, you're just not growing fast enough, or you're just not building the right, you're not pitching your business the right way. So I think that, you know, the summary would be, you know, don't be afraid to ask somebody, what's the lexicon of tech of tech startups, right? Like, how do I describe growth? How do I describe what I'm going to do with capital? What are the words that I use? Because I closed my $15 million round because of a phrase that I said I answered a question properly at an airport in San Francisco, because I answered a question properly because of a conversation I actually had with Paige a long time ago. And it's just learning those things is really important. That lexicon is really, really, really important, because as an entrepreneur, you are selling yourself, and people want to try to find a reason not to believe in you, right? Because they're de-risking. And the more confident you are, and it comes across as authentic and real, and the more you know your shit. Like, I've talked to successful people who have companies that are doing $500,000 in revenue, but if I ask them what their churn looks like, they fumble. And they don't realize that in a conversation, somebody who loves your company now isn't going to invest over that little bit. So I would say, like, just learn that being a tech entrepreneur is more about how you can, it's often, you know, you're going to have zero success if you can't build something people love. But you're going to have less success if you don't learn how to shepherd the narrative of your business through the world, so that you can hire people, you can convince people to invest in you, and hopefully at some point you can convince somebody to buy you, or you can ring the bell, right? So that's what I would say. Just kind of know your shit, like know where the bar is and know how to jump over it, because that's the number one challenge entrepreneurs have. And I was very fortunate that I was in Pittsburgh. I had hunkered, I'm going to shut up here. I hunkered down, and I was going to just run this company profitable. And I got a call from somebody who talked to me for an hour, and said he's going to write me a $100,000 check. And I ended up raising $700,000 in 3 days. And that moment, I want more Atlanta entrepreneurs to understand that that's real velocity. That's not a fantasy for one person. Like, that can happen if you learn how to say the right things, because that person told me, say these things. and I actually said those things.
Anyway. Real quick, because what Don just said, like, that was real talk, particularly for folks that look like me and him, like, master the game. Like, this is just to get what you saying, know your shit, how master the game. Like, that is what will get you to a win. If you don't master the game, you don't got a shot in it.
Yeah.
I love that. All really, really great tidbits and insights. Thank you all so much for joining us. I want to welcome Joey to say a few closing remarks and just thank everyone for coming.
See, that's why we have this panel. That's called raising the bar. Like, when I was thinking about doing, you know, specific tracks, I've always been enamored by the level of talent moving or choosing Atlanta in like the last few years. And there's an opportunity here, right? There's an opportunity for the people on this panel, and there are plenty of others that could have been here as well, to impart their knowledge that they're learning from all other parts of the country, but also the world, to help us all get better. So, one, I wanted to say thank you to everyone here for choosing Atlanta, and then choosing to be with us here at this moment in part. You know, this is a masterclass, right? You know, these individuals charge, and especially Yusuf, probably charge a lot of money per hour to give it. So truly, thank you a ton. I want to talk a little bit quickly about what's going on for the rest of the Inclusive Innovation track. This week, tomorrow, we have two amazing panels on Latinx startup leaders in the local ecosystem, as well as top women CEO founders. So the Latinx panel is at 11 a.m. Eastern. The top women CEO founders is at 2 p.m. And then on Friday, we have two panels on, one is on corporations, who they work with diverse-led startups. And then the one at 2 p.m. on Friday is around the Google for Startups Black Founders Fund award winners, of which Don and Demolo are part of that crew as well. So thank you a ton. Continue to enjoy the rest of Startup Week. It's been awesome. And then tell a friend to choose ATL. See y'all later.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you all.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.
Right.